The mahogany doors of the Thorne estate didn't creak, they sighed, a heavy, expensive sound that smelled of lemon oil and old secrets. Elias Thorne stood in the foyer, his cheap wool coat a jarring gray smudge against the vibrant Persian rugs. It had been 12 years since he was last in this house, the night his father, Silas, had pointed a trembling finger at the door and told him that a disgrace to the bloodline had no place at the table. Elias was the firstborn, the son meant to inherit the Thorne Empire, a sprawling network of shipping lanes and logistics firms. But Elias had committed the ultimate sin in Silas's eyes. He had a conscience. He had refused to overlook the safety violations in the lower-tier warehouses. He had chosen integrity over the ledger. Elias, you actually showed up. The voice belonged to Julian, the younger brother by 3 years. Julian looked like a polished stone, smooth, cold, and meticulously shaped by Silas's harsh hands. Beside him stood their sister, Clara, draped in silk that cost more than Elias's monthly rent as a public high school teacher. The lawyer called. Julian, Elias said softly. Father is dead. I came to say goodbye. You came for the reading, Clara sneered, swirling a glass of amber liquid. Let's be honest. But don't get your hopes up. Father spent the last decade making sure you were erased from every document, every photo, every penny. The funeral had been a cold affair, more a corporate networking event than a mourning. Now, gathered in the library, the tension was thick enough to choke the sunlight streaming through the windows. Mr. Sterling, the family's long-suffering attorney, sat behind the massive oak desk, looking at the 3 siblings with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. We shall begin, Sterling said. Julian leaned back, a smug smile playing on his lips. He had spent years whispering in Silas's ear, poisoning the well against Elias while siphoning funds into his own offshore accounts. He was the golden child now, the one who had stayed and played the game. To my daughter, Clara, Sterling read, I leave the estate in Provence and a trust of $5 million. May it provide the comfort you so desperately crave. Clara exhaled, a sharp puff of relief. To my son, Julian, Sterling continued, his voice dropping an octave. I leave the chairmanship of Thorne Holdings and the remaining liquid assets. You have shown yourself to be exactly the man I raised you to be. Julian's grin broadened. He glanced at Elias, eyes gleaming with triumph. Sorry, big brother. Looks like you're walking away with exactly what you brought, nothing. But Sterling hadn't closed the folder. He cleared his throat, his hands trembling slightly. However, there is a codicil. Added 6 months ago, after the audit of the northern divisions. Julian's grin froze. Audit? What audit? Silas was many things, Sterling said, looking Julian dead in the eye, but he was not a fool. He knew someone was bleeding the company dry. He spent his final months tracing the shadows. Sterling turned the page. The codicil reads as follows, To my firstborn, Elias. I spent your life punishing you for your softness, calling it a weakness. But as I sat in the silence of my ending, I realized that what I called weakness was the only thing that could have saved this family. Julian is my shadow, all the greed and ruthlessness I cultivated, turned back upon me. He has embezzled $40 million from the firm, thinking I was too blind to see. The silence in the room became a vacuum. Julian stood up, his face flushing a violent purple. This is a lie. He was delusional at the end. Sit down, Julian, Sterling snapped. The evidence is already with the authorities. The codicil continues, therefore, I strip Julian of all inheritance. The chairmanship, the holdings, and the family name are hereby stripped. He is to be removed from the property immediately. Clara gasped, dropping her glass. It shattered on the hardwood, the sound like a gunshot. And Elias, Sterling's voice softened. To you, I leave the old ledger. It is in the wall safe behind the portrait of your mother. Julian lunged for the portrait, but Elias was faster. It wasn't about the money. It was about the woman his father had tried to forget. Elias swung the portrait aside and dialed the combination he had never forgotten, his mother's birthday. The safe clicked. Inside wasn't a stack of bonds or a deed. It was a battered, leather-bound notebook and a small, velvet box. Elias opened the notebook. It was filled with his mother's handwriting, the poems she wrote before she died, the recipes she loved, and her final letters to her sons. Folded between the pages was a single photograph Elias had thought lost forever, a picture of him as a toddler, held by a smiling, younger Silas, before the business had turned his heart to flint. Underneath the notebook was the velvet box. Inside was the Star of the North, a raw, uncut diamond the size of a pigeon's egg, the foundation stone of the Thorn fortune that had been missing for 40 years. It was worth more than the estate, the company, and the liquid assets combined. He gave it to you. Julian whispered, his voice cracking. Thud at the foundation. That's the whole legacy. No, Elias said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at the photograph of the father who had finally, in the 11th hour, seen him. The legacy is in the book. He gave me the one thing you couldn't understand, Julian. He gave me the truth. Julian was escorted out by security 10 minutes later, screaming threats that faded into the rainy afternoon. Clara sat in the corner, sobbing not for her brother, but for the loss of the status she had built her life upon. Elias stood alone in the library. He looked at the massive desk, the symbol of a Thorn's power. He didn't sit in the chair. Instead, he walked to the window. He would sell the company to an employee-owned conglomerate. He would use the diamond to fund the safety reforms he had fought for a decade ago. He would keep the house, but he would tear down the heavy drapes and let the light in. As he turned to leave, he saw a small note tucked into the back of the velvet box. Elias, it read in Silas's shaky, terminal hand. You were right. It took the dark to make me see the light you carried. Don't be like me. Be the man your mother hoped you would be. Forgive me, if there is any room left in that heart of yours. Elias tucked the note into his pocket. He felt the weight of 12 years of bitterness finally lifting, replaced by a strange, somber peace. He walked out of the house, not as a disinherited son, but as a man who had finally come home. The rain had stopped. For the first time in a century, the Thorn estate felt quiet. Not the silence of a tomb, but the stillness of a fresh start. Elias drove away, the old notebook on the passenger seat, heading toward a life where the only thing he had to inherit was his own future. Thank you for watching and listening to Tales by Dansuthia. Please do well to subscribe, like, comment and share.
Let's stop and think, my people.